This is the Center Square Daily for Wednesday, February 11th, 2026. I'm your host, Greg Bishop. Thanks for being with us. We continue to monitor the looming funding lapse for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Democrats continue to demand reforms to immigration and customs enforcement in order to free up funding for the Department of Homeland Security. Among those reforms, body cameras for ICE agents, identification, no-knock warrants being ended, and a variety of other things, with some agreement on the other side of the aisle, but the Trump administration Republicans saying other priorities of Democrats could make it almost impossible to enforce immigration law. A hearing this morning covered DHS operations that could be impacted by a possible shutdown, with that shutdown coming as soon as Friday. And programs that could be impacted: the TSA, the Coast Guard, the Secret Service, and disaster relief funding. This morning during that hearing, Republican U.S. Representative Mark Amati from Nevada, he said that while Secret Service will be impacted, while the TSA will be impacted, while the Coast Guard will be impacted, ICE will not be impacted. While Connecticut U.S. Representative Rosa DeLauro, she said that there must be reforms to ICE.
So if we shut down the department over ICE and CBP enforcement actions in Minneapolis and my colleagues' lists of policy demands, here's what will happen. Immigration and removal operations will continue. Wall construction will continue. Anything funded by reconciliation dollars will continue.
ICE cannot be abolished, but I will not provide a single cent for those agencies until dramatic changes are made. We will not provide a single cent for those agencies until real changes are made. The vast majority of Americans are overwhelmingly support the reforms that the Democrats have laid out.
And again, among those reforms, the White House has already implemented body cameras for ICE officials. And whether or not they're able to come to terms on other reforms Democrats are demanding, again, that deadline rapidly approaching for Friday, where taxpayers may not know exactly how their funding is going to be used for the TSA, the Coast Guard, disaster relief through FEMA, and on and on. So clearly they're bracing for another partial shutdown, with some lawmakers saying they need to stick around and continue to the debate until they get to common ground. All of the debate about ICE enforcement and immigration, and also the outcomes of what we've seen on the streets in the past month, with a couple of U.S. citizens being shot and killed by ICE officers on the streets in Minnesota. The White House pushing back on narratives they see being spread across the media. CBS News recently reported that less than 14% of those that were arrested by ICE are actually violent offenders, while the White House pushes back and says the truth is 70% of arrests of illegal aliens are individuals charged or convicted of a crime in the U.S. Again, the distinction there being violent crime versus crime, and White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt making that distinction clear during a White House press briefing yesterday.
Approximately 70% of illegal aliens arrested under President Trump have pending criminal charges and/or prior convictions, and these so-called non-violent crimes: drug trafficking, distribution of child porn, burglary, fraud, DUI, embezzlement, solicitation of a minor, and human smuggling, just to name a few. So just because a crime is not violent in nature doesn't mean that crime is victimless. And I can guarantee every single person who is out there on television right now pointing to these statistics that were taken out of context by CBS News would not want an illegal alien convicted of the distribution of child porn or fraud or DUI living in your community.
Now, while Congress continues to grapple with that looming DHS funding deadline for the end of the week, a school administrator association is detailing how schools can interact with immigration officials. With an exclusive for the Center Square, education reporter Esther Wickham joins us. Esther, tell us about the American Association of School Administrators webinar that you were tipped off to.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. So just like you said, the American Association of School Administrators hosted this members-only virtual webinar. And luckily, the Center Square was able to obtain this exclusive information, which essentially provided these members and these school leaders some guidance on, how schools should be responding to potential encounters if U.S. immigration enforcement, come onto campus. And so the materials kind of highlight that. They kind of go through what these school administrators, these education officials should do in case of that emergency, as well as how students and parents can, be safe and make sure and ensure that their own safety and the ability to combat, know their rights and know what to say against immigration officials.
Now, let's take a look at just some of the graphics from this presentation that was provided, and it was called Operational Readiness, a practical playbook for ICE encounters, with a variety of different things like scripts and how to alert others about immigration officers that might be on the scene at schools. Esther, was there anything in there about cooperating with instead of seeming to put up barriers to enforcement?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely debatable depending on, how you interpret this playbook. But just like you said, this readiness, this playbook kind of shows, how these administrators and how these education officials should encounter, ICE enforcement and ICE incidents. And, essentially it kind of highlights how these administrators should, keep the doors closed if immigration officials come onto campus, and they should be requesting that, these ICE agents have a judicial warrant. And it kind of highlights what they call the quote unquote warrant trap, showing a sample of what a DHS warrant, an administrative warrant issue looks like versus a judicial warrant. And it kind of clarifies, don't, engage with them. Don't try and, be aggressive. It kind of highlights, keep the peace, keep the children safe as possible, but, have the door closed, tell them to slide the warrant that they have under the door. And they also tell the school resource officers, the law enforcement that are kind of on the grounds there to protect the children, to not assist federal immigration enforcement unless they're legally compelled to through the judicial warrant. But in a sense, this kind of playbook says, if they encounter ICE agents, they should, just stick to the script that the playbook provides, as well as, trying to keep the peace and not come off as aggressive and follow the law.
Now, Esther, want to make sure people understand this is not the Department of Education providing this operations playbook, so to speak. This is an association, a private association. Tell us about the American Association of School Administrators. Who are they, and where do they get their money?
Yeah, just like you said, this is not a federal administration. This is definitely something that is more for local school districts. The AASA represents over 10,000 superintendents and education leaders nationwide, and they are primarily funded through membership dues. And, these active membership costs are low as, $86 annually, all the way up to $485. And, this kind of membership allows people to, attend these kinds of conferences and events online, but as well as do, teacher trainings and, various things like that. And, these local school districts encourage a lot of educators and superintendents to have these memberships. And the way that they do that is they reimburse them as professional expenses. So I feel like the important thing to highlight here is a lot of these, a lot of this funding that they are receiving are taxpayer dollars. ProPublica did a report on AASA looking at their revenue stream, and they make over $20 million in revenue annually. And 66%, almost 67% of that comes from program services. And so this is, a heavily taxpayer-funded association. And, it's important to note that these local school districts within the K through 12 system, within the public school system, is being supported and funded through the taxpayer. And so it's really interesting to see, And the question is, are these programs and are these education services there to, provide education for the teachers and to protect the students, or to push a political agenda?
I think it's important people understand this issue of associations for government organizations, right? School administrators, for instance. There's even associations for municipal governments that municipal leaders join this association. It's a private association, not open to FOIA and the Freedom of Information Act, but they're essentially being funded by your tax dollars on a local level, by these elected officials or these school officials or other public sector employees becoming members to these groups. Plus, you also have to look at these junkets they may be going on. Sometimes these local officials, regardless if it's a park district or, again, a school, they'll have those dollars used to travel to a seminar reimbursed by the local taxpayer. But all of that aside, did we get any comment from the association on this particular story about encouraging school administrators to, quote, know their rights in the face of immigration enforcement?
Yeah, the Center Square reached out to the association multiple times, phone calls, emails, especially trying to get to the bottom of, where exactly this funding is going towards, and if they can, confirm that, even though that is pretty much a fact to the local districts reimbursing them. But I think it's important to note too, within this playbook, that on a national level, many school districts are advising students and families to have like you said, know your rights card. These are cards you can print out, you can have on the back of your student ID. And it essentially, encourages them to, don't talk to them, tell them you plead the fifth, reminding these students, what their constitutional rights are, as well as, the National Immigration Law Center advises these individuals to, like I said, assert their constitutional rights when encountering these immigration authorities. And so as the DHS, the Secretary of Public Affairs has said many times, to kind of counteract that, they've said, ICE is not going to schools to make arrests of children, quote unquote. This is something that the DHS and I think the White House and the Trump administration has stood behind multiple times. And so I think that there's a kind of a lot of back and forth of, should we be prepared? Should we, make sure there's a game plan if, chaos ensues on campus to keep children safe? Yes, but also looking at the facts of, has there been ICE enforcement on campus?
It's also interesting to juxtapose this particular webinar with what we've seen pop up across the country in some pockets with schools allowing students to go out and protest in the streets, immigration enforcement. So you can see how some people would be concerned if indeed there was a political slant to this presentation that the association is putting forward to school administrators. And again, DHS, while they've made statements about, in general, not going onto the grounds of schools to enforce immigration, did they respond to this particular webinar that you got tipped off to at the Center Square?
No, they did not. Again, like I said, I emailed and called many times, just confirming, that, hey, this information that I received from a member of this association is saying, this is what happened. Here are some clips and videos, but they did not respond in a timely manner to kind of counteract or enforce, what is being said. But Greg, just to kind of add on to that, I was able to talk to Steve Smith. He's a former school resource officer, but he's also a senior fellow of urban studies at the Pacific Research Institute. So he was able to have some kind of, personal experience on this. And he kind of highlights, yes, it's important. Same thing with, school shootings. Schools should have a protocol and a playbook in place. If, some incident or chaos ensues on campus, there should be a protocol to follow to first and foremost keep these children safe. But his thing that he highlights is, students should not interrupt law enforcement presence. If there is, major danger, they should not come out or try and, fight or do anything like that. They should, keep the peace and try and stay safe. But he emphasizes that, yes, we should focus on constitutional rights and reminding students and teachers of that. But if what the superintendents and what these programs are doing are stoking fear and they're pushing a political agenda, as he says, then that's a bad thing. These superintendents, as he says, should be really careful on the kinds of language that they are saying to these students and to these local school districts. Are they, as he says, raising anxiety for these students in how this, process should go? Or is he, or are they rightfully preparing these kids for imminent danger? And so I feel like that's where the dichotomy kind of comes in, because we have the DHS and the White House saying there hasn't been any kind of raid or investigation on a school campus. But, a lot of these school districts are preparing. And just like you said, Greg, kids are walking out of school and not, getting taught, but on the streets protesting.
Again, you can read the exclusive from Esther Superintendent Group webinar details school response to ICE. Get the story at the Center Square. Esther, greatly appreciate your reporting.